When the original Gold and Silver released in 1999, Game Freak said they didn't feel fully complete, not even close. Series creator Satoshi Tajiri looked ahead to the future and prognosticated, saying, "I'm thinking that the best Pokemon game will be released sooner rather than later, but whether or not it'll be the best Pokemon game is something I can't achieve on my own. From here on out, kids who grew up playing may grow up to be game developers, right? And if those kids have the same vision as us, then I definitely think it's possible to expand the world of Pokemon by working together with them." Tajiri's prediction came true. At sunup the day Gold and Silver released in Japan, a young Takao Uno was in line at the store waiting to buy them. 10 years later, he was art director for those games' remakes. Game Freak made Fire Red and Leaf Green in just over a year, but went all out and spent 3 years on HeartGold and SoulSilver. With the highest review scores in the entire franchise, you could say these are the best Pokemon games that Tajiri predicted. Not bad, considering they were made by a team of just a dozen guys. In this video, we're going to translate some old Japanese magazines and websites to find new information about HeartGold and SoulSilver, go behind the scenes, and see how Game Freak pulled it off. For preservation's sake, we'll publicly archive every interview translation we did for this video, so you can read them in full, linked in this video's description. The love put into HeartGold and SoulSilver smacks you in the face as soon as you walk out your front door. In the original New Bark town, there's a sign that says, "The town where winds of a new beginning blow." But you kinda had to use your imagination, because there wasn't any wind. And most kids probably never even took the time to read the sign. In one of these Japanese magazines, Takao Uno says he did read it, and it made a huge impression on him. So for the remakes, he added some windmills and actual wind, so New Bark Town lived up to the promise of that 10-year-old sign. He said, "As a fan myself, I made these games something I would want to play. I worked to make the Gold and Silver I remembered from the Game Boy era a wider, more vibrant, and more fun world. So I hope you'll enjoy exploring it side by side with your favorite Pokemon." Speaking of exploring side by side, you could say that's why the remakes are called HeartGold and SoulSilver. Walking Pokemon was director Shigeki Morimoto's idea, who said, "We considered a lot of options for the titles, and thought about things like how you can walk around with Pokemon, and the relationship between Ho-Oh and Lugia. We concluded that a major theme of these games is sharing meaningful experiences with Pokemon, so we chose Heart and Soul to communicate that idea." There's a section in one of these magazines called The Secret Story of Walking with Pokemon. In the earlier Sinnoh games, you could only walk with Pokemon in one little area, not the entire game world. But Game Freak was determined to make it possible in Johto. They drew overworld sprites for all 493 Pokemon, plus gender differences and shinies, and added animations. Not just for walking, but also thousands of little reactions when you talk to them, or situations that only happen with certain Pokemon in specific locations. Making sure Pokemon didn't get caught up on weird terrain was especially tricky, and the whole initiative was arguably the most difficult part of the entire game's development. Takao Uno was speechless when Morimoto told him they were really gonna do it. Quote, "I was shocked, but it was our dream to let players walk through this wide world together with their Pokemon, so even though it was exhausting work, I just thought, it's gonna be worth it while I was drawing them. I thought, if it'll make the fans happy, I'll do it." After all, they did it with one Pokemon back in Yellow version. All the devs agreed, we can't lose to a 10-year-old Game Boy game. It was Nintendo who proposed the idea of letting players walk with their Pokemon in real life, by bundling every copy of HeartGold and SoulSilver with a pedometer called the Pokéwalker, which let fans transfer over their favorite monsters to take for walks and gain EXP. Pokemon Company president Ishihara actually wanted to try and sell 6 Pokéwalkers to fans, so they'd have a full team just like a real Pokemon trainer. It's those kinds of ideas that made him the merchandise kingpin he is today, and earned him the nickname the King of Portable Toys. They ended up not pushing to have fans buy 6 of them, probably for the best, as it would have cost kids a small fortune. The Pokéwalker's designer Shigeru Omori did carry 6 of them though. He was another one of Tajiri's predictions that came true. He said, "I was a student when I played Gold and Silver. It was interesting to work on a game that fascinated me 10 years ago. I wish for everyone to have the chance to find something that fascinates them at a young age so they can carry that passion into their adult life." For a lot of folks watching this video, we imagine that last part describes y'all's relationship with Pokemon to this very day. Even though HeartGold and SoulSilver didn't introduce any brand new Pokemon, they did change a few old ones, in subtle ways you probably never even noticed. Ken Sugimori made all the original Gold and Silver artwork, and he returned to ink a new art set for the remakes. The most obvious change is his entire art style. Back in the old days, he said he was basically using watercolor to imitate Akira Toriyama's style. You know, the Dragon Ball guy. But as he got older, he didn't want to do that anymore, and moved on to something new. In a Nintendo Dream magazine we translated, they asked Sugimori about his philosophy for the remake's art set. He said he didn't want to make any big changes, cause that'd upset fans who loved a particular Pokemon since childhood, and would hate to see it suddenly look different. Quote, "Every Pokemon is somebody's favorite, and Pokemon belong to everyone, so I try not to change them too much." So the new artworks aren't so much remakes as they are remasters with subtle updates, like Meganium's flower, for example, and Stantler's tail, which was originally white but changed to brown. Gligar's claws and wing spikes aren't white anymore either, now they're pink. Scizzor's got 3 abdomen sternites when he originally only had 2, and Ursaring used to have 4 claws on each paw, but now he's got 5. Sugimori also changed the finger counts on Haunter and Mr. Mime a few years earlier. In our video covering the Kanto remakes, we talked about the Japanese taboo against 4-fingered characters, and how it's considered offensive to people who've lost fingers, like butchers and meat packers. About a dozen Johto Pokemon's poses were identical to 10 years earlier, but Sugimori explained why he changed the rest of them. He said, "There are some Pokemon poses that I've grown tired of seeing after 10 years and made changes to. But if I thought a pose looked as cool as it could get, I left it the way it was. An official illustration needs to be from a perspective that shows everything you need to know to understand a Pokemon, which can be very difficult. That said, I aimed to draw most Pokemon so you could see them from a fresh perspective." And of course, a lot of Pokemon colors look different, but we're mostly going to chalk that up to Sugimori's new art style. Speaking of different colors, there actually was one new Pokemon variant added in HeartGold and SoulSilver, the time-traveling, female-only Spiky-eared Pichu. But she was originally going to be a white Pichu, which we know thanks to Shoko Nakagawa. She's a host of some Japanese TV shows like Pokemon Sunday, and also Spiky-eared Pichu's voice actress. We bought Shoko's autobiography from Japan, where she reveals, quote, "Originally, Spiky-eared Pichu was going to be white Pichu instead, and I heard they were even thinking about making a brand of white cream stew to go along with it and everything. But they eventually went with Spiky-eared Pichu instead." The Japanese words for white Pichu and white stew are nearly identical. Howaito Pichu and Howaito Shichu, so the marketing would have written itself. As the largest media franchise in the world, the Pokemon company's always looking for new merchandising opportunities wherever they can get them. We also got a visual of white Pichu thanks to Shoko. In 2014, there was a Pokemon art exhibit in Tokyo, with strict rules against photography, but Shoko flaunted those rules and snapped this picture. It looks like Game Freak considered a few other variants as well, like Heart Cheek Pichu and Pichu with a bad haircut. They ended up picking Spiky-eared Pichu, but you could say she's a lost Pokemon too, in her own way. She can travel through time with Celebi, but she can never be transferred off a HeartGold or SoulSilver cartridge, so she'll always be stuck, forever, in the Johto remakes. Well, except she is in Smash Bros. Ultimate. Maybe she time-traveled a couple console generations into the future. The game's sound was another major focus, with HeartGold and SoulSilver being the first in the series to include environmental sound effects. In these magazines, lead audio designer Go Ichinose says Johto'd feel lonely if the sound didn't live up to the new visuals, and recounted his struggles to make nature come alive all over Johto. What you're actually hearing are sound files ripped from the game's data. In normal play, you'd barely hear them over the game's music, which makes the effort all the more admirable. In a speech at the 2023 CDEC Developers Conference, Ichinose said adding all those environmental sounds was incredibly expensive, because they all had to be placed in the overworld manually, tile by tile. To keep costs from getting completely out of control, he says they eventually had to give up on placing those kind of sounds with human hands, and switch to using procedural generation in later gens. That's a surprisingly interesting story all on its own, but it's pretty in-depth and really more relevant to Legends Arceus, so we'll save it for a future video. Boasting 270 tracks, HeartGold and SoulSilver had a massive OST. A Super Music Collection CD was released physically in Japan. It did release internationally 5 years later, but only in a digital format as a $10 iTunes download. Ichinose said Johto has a strong Japanese motif, so they made its music also sound very Japanese. On the other hand, Sinnoh's music was a bit more mature and a bit cooler. And before that, he said Hoenn was hot, so the musical theme was that its music should be hot too. When Ichinose looked back on that gargantuan soundtrack, one track in particular stuck out in his memory. He said, "When I was making Lugia's battle theme, I looked at a ridiculous amount of artwork and videos, and thought about Lugia all day and dreamed about Lugia all night. At some point, I fell in love. It's my favorite Johto Pokemon. So was it worth dreaming about all day and night? Here's what he ended up with. We'll let you be the judge." By the way, while we're rooting around in the game's files, we found this unused sound effect for Snorlax's snoring. And also some unused wind sounds. Oh yeah, and HeartGold and SoulSilver's protagonist Ethan is a ninja, but only in the remakes. Ken Sugimori made the original Gen 2 protagonists Ethan and Chris to look pretty Western, but the new art director, Takao Uno, said he remade Ethan to look more Japanese in the remakes. In one of these magazine translations, he says, "We wanted to make him more Japanese, or rather, make him look kind of like a ninja." Someone asks if he actually is a ninja, and Uno says, "He sure is. He has the tapered pants and the tight clothes." HeartGold and SoulSilver recreate Crystal version's content, so it's a bit strange that Crystal's female protagonist Chris is nowhere to be found in the new Johto. According to Uno, that was sort of an accident, because he started drawing the remake's female protagonist without thinking to look back at Sugimori's Gen 2 artwork. First and foremost, he designed her thinking she'd be walking with her Pokemon a lot, so he gave her good walking clothes, shorts and overalls, unlike Dawn in Diamond and Pearl who wears a skirt. The girl he ended up with looked nothing like Chris, so he just decided to name her Lyra and not try and say she's still the original character. That's why Chris got written out of the remakes, even though Ethan got to stick around. By the way, if you're wondering why Dawn wore a skirt in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, it's because Masuda wanted her that way. To quote him from one of these Japanese magazines, he says, "I really like skirts, so I insisted the female protagonist should wear one in Diamond and Pearl." Anyway, we'll get more into these Gen 4 translations in our next Sinnoh video. Till then, did you also know we found and archived an official 20-year-old lost Pokemon game? It's 100% restored. You could play it today if you wanted. To learn more about it and every other lost Pokemon game, click the video on screen. You can find my stuff over on my channel. I make a lot of cool Pokemon videos, and hopefully, I'll make more soon. Special thanks to our translators, Proofreader, Art Scanner, File Ripper, and everyone else who made this video possible. And thank you for watching. See you next time.